It is time for Around the 412 with Smitty and Tyler.
Welcome back to another episode of Around the 412. I am Tyler. With me, as always, is my co-host, Smitty. Follow us on all of our socials at Around the 412. We're everywhere, so go check those out. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or you're watching over on YouTube, go check out the link we have in the description of the show as well. We've got Everything Custom Designs, our friend Haley Wagner's small business. She does customized clothing. We do a lot of holiday stuff, but she can do outside of holidays. She can also do like sports stuff, city stuff, really anything. It's Everything Custom Designs for a reason. So go check her out. We got the Facebook link down there, so she can hook you up with all sorts of good stuff. This is Around the 412 Steelers show. So we got a lot of draft and free agent talk to talk about. Tis the season, you know. That's the time of year. Not a lot of stuff really going on, so it's more or less speculation than anything at this point.
Yeah, it's silly season before we get into free agency here soon. The combine's going on this week. That's pretty cool. I mean, that would give us something to talk about. Been talking with Alan. Nick was on today's show with me, talking about some combine stuff. And maybe some of that will leak into this as well if we're going to get into draft stuff. But yeah, I would say for the biggest dead period that we have in the NFL is past, which is cool. So because by the time combine, free agency, draft, then we're going to fly by until the season starts pretty much. Then we get the training camp but yeah, I wanted to ask you a couple things that we've talked about this week on Afternoon Drive and were presented to us. We've spent so much time talking about the quarterbacks and that conversation. When you don't have a set in stone franchise quarterback, this is what life is.
That's the only thing you talk about.
Yeah, I mean it is, and it is the way that it is. But we got a couple questions as well from Twitter that we'll bring into the conversation. But I wanted to ask you what you feel like is kind of like the ideal scenario for the Steelers. And when I say that, I mean the offseason in totality, free agency and the draft. Because if you're looking at the Steelers roster, there's more holes on the roster than they have draft picks. And they can create cap space, sure, but they'll be putting themselves continuing to kick the can further down the road with restructuring contracts and stuff, the more cap space that you want to create. So it's really not feasible to just say, go sign Kirk Cousins and create that cap space to do so. So for you, when you look at what the Steelers have on the roster, what they need on the roster, and the lack of money that they have right now, and the amount of draft capital that they have right now, what is the best way to approach filling the holes on the roster?
I think you have to do that, in my opinion, by looking at the strengths of free agency and the strengths of the draft itself. For where the Steelers are picking and the draft class as a whole, there's a few positions that I think there are strengths for in this draft, but overall, a lot of the positions that the Steelers have needs for, I don't think that they could fill in this draft. But some of the easy ones, for me at least, are tackle, corner, defensive tackle, center. Obviously, I've been very vocal about that as well. So yeah. I think that, and especially we haven't talked about this because we didn't have a Steelers show last week. Mason Cole being released, I feel like center is definitely in the cards for not just one of their first two picks, but arguably their first pick at pick 20, because they don't have a starting center if we were starting the season today. And I imagine that they're probably not going to fill that with free agency. If I had to guess, I would make the assumption that either Jackson Powers-Johnson or Zach Frazier is going to be a Pittsburgh Steeler. I'm not sure which one it's going to be, but I would bet on at least one of those two being a Steeler after the first 2 days of the draft. So I would expect center you address in the draft. I think you could look at tackle in the draft as well, and corner in the draft as well. I think that when you look at the safety position or middle linebacker position, that's something that I would target more in free agency. I don't really think the draft is going to be where you would want to look for guys that can fill in right away at those positions. I don't think that there's a ton of starting caliber players that you're going to get right away from drafting those guys. So those positions, I mean, we talked about getting Jordan Whitehead. That would be my ideal to pair along with Minkah Fitzpatrick in the safety room. And then some linebackers. I feel like unless you're getting a linebacker early, if the Steelers in the second round were to take who's the kid from Texas A&M? Or is it
Which position?
Linebacker.
Edgerrin Cooper.
Yeah, if they were to take him in like the second round or something, which I mean he might even go higher than where the Steelers pick. I don't think that would be a bad pick at all, but I don't think that they're going to find like replaceable starters right away in this year's draft at the linebacker position. Considering their other needs at what they're going to be looking for early on as well. So that's kind of how I'd approach it. Certain positions like corner, tackle, and center, and even defensive tackle. I mentioned that. But I feel like defensive tackle for the past several years has always been a sneaky need, even if it hasn't been a very vocal need for the Steelers. And I feel like that's probably because you've always been able to rely on Cam Hayward, and they've always had some pretty decent depth. But every single year you kind of look at, especially like the past, I would say 2 to 3 years, you look at where the Steelers were going into the offseason with their defensive tackle like room, and then you look at what they were able to address in free agency and the draft. Even though it wasn't necessarily the leading need for the team or the most vocal lead for the team when it comes to what the fan base is looking at adding, it's always been addressed, and I feel like that's going to continue to be the case, especially with we don't know how Cam's going to be next season. There's all the speculation of how him and his contract and all that. He addresses it on Twitter, which is pretty funny to see that he's acknowledging that, and it fuels him. But nonetheless, I think that's another position that they could look at. But regardless of that, my ideal would be to look at specific positions in the draft and the positions of free agency. I know that's a very broad answer, but I think that when you're looking at the specific positions, there's strengths in the draft and there's strengths in free agency that the Steelers can address. And the one position that I wasn't really talking about and kind of avoiding talking about because it's been talked about so much was quarterback. Quarterback, I don't know what the heck they're going to do. I don't know what to do because there's a difference in my head of what I would ideally want to do and what I think the Steelers could feasibly do and what I think the Steelers will do. Those are like 3 different answers. Obviously, if I wanted to be a contender right away, which as a fan I do, but I also understand that they don't necessarily have the capability of just throwing money, like you mentioned it, at Kirk Cousins. Like that would be, if I had my ideal world, I would probably take Kirk Cousins and pluck him as the starter because that's probably your most ideal quarterback if you want to be a competitor from day one going into 2024, especially compared to everybody they have on the roster right now. I think that would be the best case scenario from just being competitive standpoint. And I don't think that that's going to happen because I don't think they had the cap room to be able to do that, especially if they want to sign other positions. I don't think that they would feasibly be able to work that out. My ideal would probably be, and also I'll just throw in Justin Fields. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. My ideal is not Justin Fields because of the reasons that we laid out back then. We don't know if he's going to be worth whatever the Steelers are going to give up. We have no idea what even the asking price for him is. And if the asking price is something that the Steelers could give up, it's probably going to be something that I personally would be too high, that's too bullish for me. If they want like a 3rd round pick or higher, even a 4, like I think that that's too much for me because you draft a guy with a 1st round pick because of the ceiling they could have in the NFL. You don't trade picks for a ceiling that they haven't hit and could still have in year 4 of the NFL. So I would stay away from Justin Fields, even though the idea of him is very intriguing. I just don't think it's worth what you might have to give up to be able to get him. And so I think that honestly, my ideal for this upcoming season, and we talked about this when we talked about Arthur Smith being hired, would be to bring in a guy like Ryan Tannehill and to see if you can muster up some sort of connection that they had whenever he was in Tennessee and see if he can compete with Kenny Pickett, see if he can push Kenny Pickett to be better, because if you're asking me who's the starter going into next season, it's definitely Kenny Pickett. But I do think they need to bring in somebody that can push him. I don't think, regardless of what we saw at the end of last season, I don't think that's going to be Mason Rudolph. I think they're going to have to bring in somebody else. And I think that Tannehill would be able to do that in a way. I know he's not as athletic as he used to be because he's getting older and everything. But I think that with the way the Steelers offense is able to be set up and the way he operated within that Tennessee offense, I think that they could work out something where even though he's not as athletic as he was whenever it was like 4 or 5 years ago, they could still figure some things out with him and move forward with that. because I just don't think there's a ton of options that they have at the quarterback position. I mean, what you could talk about bringing in Russell Wilson. You could talk about making trades for people outside. Just like I don't know if anything that I would say like that would be even feasible. So I don't want to say that's my ideal just because I don't think that it's going to realistically happen.
Yeah, I'm on the Rush train personally. Because here's the thing. He's going to be the minimum. That's what you're paying him, regardless, because he's getting paid $38 million next season. It's an offset contract. So whatever the Steelers don't pay, Denver has to pay. Why would Russ care where that money? He should be making Denver pay as much of that as possible, so he's not taking salary away from the team that he's signing with. So he's going to sign for the minimum, wherever it is, and Denver has to pay the rest of that. Listen, he's obviously a far cry from the player that he was in Seattle, but still 26 touchdowns last year to 8 interceptions, somewhere around there. The one concern that I do have is the lack of the middle of field usage. You know, how long have we as Steelers fans been complaining about that? And that is a Russ thing. Like, that wasn't even like a product of the offense he's playing. And like, historically, it has not mattered for Russ where he's been at. He just hasn't used the middle of the field a ton. So I think that would probably be my one concern with him in the offense. But for the minimum is what I'm talking about here. Like, that's why it's attractive to me, because I still assume like Kenny Pickett's going to be here and a third quarterback. I would say my top 3 realistic are Russ, Jacoby Brissett, and then Ryan Tannehill. Ideally, I mean, you mentioned Kirk Cousins. Like, if the cap was not a thing, if everybody was coming in at the same price, Kirk Cousins is the one that you want to sign out of the guys that are available, even off the Achilles injury. And I think a lot of that is due to the guardrails within Arthur Smith's offense, how easy it is to play quarterback within Arthur Smith's offense. But like, my perception of Kirk has kind of changed. Like, I liked him originally as a starter in Washington. When he left there and signed the deal in Minnesota, I was like, man, this guy just doesn't seem to ever come up big in the moments. He just seems like a stat patter. He's like a volume guy. And then it flipped back around where like I've been super impressed with the way that he stretched the field as of late. And I don't think it's fully a product of getting Justin Jefferson, because I know there's people that believe that as well. But like, this guy was balling before Justin Jefferson got there, with Stephon Diggs, with Adam Thielen. So I just think Kirk's a good quarterback, like good. I think he's within like that top. I feel like everybody gets thrown into like the top 10 to 12 range, but like legitimately, he is probably the one guy that everybody looks at as like that type of quarterback. So yeah, that would be the guy to me. It's interesting, the center stuff, because you're right. We haven't talked about Mason Cole yet. I think that they'll probably double dip. Like, you got to sign a guy as well. Like, you don't want to go into the draft and not have any guy to play center and basically telegraph to the world, hey, we're probably going to take a center 20th overall. You don't do that. Especially like with the center class at the top here, where we're talking about, where there seems to like probably a special player in Jackson Powers Johnson as the number 1 center, a pretty good one, and Zach Frazier as the number 2. To me, there's a drop off even there as well. Like, I know people have talked about that as like there's the big 4 or 5, depending on what you think about the kid out of Arkansas, Lassiter. I think it's Lassiter. But I wasn't impressed with him. Graham Barton out of Duke, who was a tackle for them, but he's going to play center in the league. And then Cedric Van Pran, who's coming off the injury. To me, like, the Steelers got to get one of those top 2. And like, if they don't sign a starter in free agency, they got to get one of those top 2. And that's a dangerous place to be. Like, do they want to corner themselves into that, basically having to take a center at 20? Because Zach Frazier, does he go in the first round? I'm not 100% sold on that, but he does definitely, in my opinion, does not make it to their second round.
You'd probably have to trade up with your second round pick.
Or a scenario that I've mentioned, and maybe un-Steelers like in the past, but we'll see how Omar feels about this. We've seen him move up. What if you move down from 20? Like, say Jackson Powers Johnson's off the board before 20. You move down, still in the first round or something, like, but you gain an extra day 2 pick, and then you take Zach Frazier still in that spot after moving down. Like, I think, to me, assuming Jackson Powers Johnson's off the board, that's probably in the realm of like the ideal scenario for me, just because the Steelers aren't coming into this draft with a ton of capital either. Like, that's kind of the reason that I presented this conversation, was because it's not like they're flushed with money or flushed with draft picks. So yeah, I think it's interesting, but like another part of the conversation to me, and the reason that I was curious as to where you would go with it, And I think that you actually like, in my opinion, said a lot of the same things that I feel. Like safety to me is not playing the draft. That's going to be free agency because I really like the free agency class. There's only like 3 safeties to me that are going to go within. There's not one that I would take in the first round. There's probably 3 that I like in round 2, but like,
And there's not
it's
any
just
that
not
you probably feel like you could become a day one starter if you were to draft them.
Yeah, I mean Tyler Nubin's nice. Like he could be the back end of round 1. Um, yeah, I mean Javon Bullard, if you consider him a safety, but he'll probably play in the nickel out of Georgia.
I mean,
I
I'm
know
just looking at the Steelers.
Cam Kitchens.
Steelers didn't even draft
Yeah.
their number 1 tackle last year, and they didn't start him from day 1 then. And
Yeah,
so
well, that's what I'm
I
worried
can.
about with I'm worried about tackle too. Like in this scenario that we're talking about, if they take a center at 20, like are they taking a tackle at 52? And if that's the case, like even if they take a tackle at 20, we might see Dan Moore to begin the season. But if they take one at 52, Dan Moore might be the starter all season. Like, is there not a level of concern there?
And maybe this is my personal concern, and I'm sure you've thought about this too. But if you get to that point, I feel like who they draft at tackle, regardless of where it is in the draft, whether it's a first round pick or whether it's later in the draft, I feel like they kind of need to make a decision on whether they want to flip Broderick before the draft. So if they want to flip him to left tackle or keep him at right tackle, I feel like that decision needs to be made because that could probably weigh a lot into the decision of who you're taking at a tackle position.
Yeah. I love this tackle class. Like, I don't know. I'm kind of leaning towards signing a starting center in free agency so that if, Frazier or somebody that you don't like basically, unfortunately, as much as I love Jackson Powers Johnson, missing out on him this year because it's easier. And like I said, I think he's going to be an awesome center. I think you're talking like probably top 5 at the position, but it's easier to find quality center play than it is to find quality tackle play. If you can find your bookend solutions in Broderick Jones and whoever this first round pick is, I think they could find a center a lot easier in free agency than they can a tackle.
So who among the first round tackles that
Mm-hmm.
are projected to be first round guys, who would you be looking at?
So like realistically, who could possibly be
Realistically, I mean, we're not
Yeah.
going to say like that you're going to get like Olaf Sean
Yeah,
or
Joe
anything
Alt.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you're not going to get one of those like top 10 guys. But like realistically at 20, assuming they say they don't trade up or trade down, so you're realistic at that spot, who are you looking at?
Yeah, it even kind of seems like Fuaga is almost isn't going to get there. Like most mock drafts that I've been doing lately, he goes like 14-ish. But like he's my number 1, perfect for Arthur Smith. I think most people, I'm curious if people are going to do this, if we see some smoke, like ideal team player fits, man, I think he's perfect for the Steelers as a right tackle. Cause I actually think for a lot of teams, he'd probably play guard, but for the Steelers, I think he's the ideal right tackle for this offense. I would have Tyler Guyton probably as number 2 for me. Amarius Mims is interesting. Only started 8 games. Like we think Broderick's raw, but like, man, how quickly is Amarius Mims going to get onto the field for the Steelers as a guy that only started 8 games in college? I would say in that order, Fuaga, Guyton, Amarius Mims is my 1, 2, 3. And then you get into like JC Latham, who I'm not sold on as a tackle. I don't know that there's really anybody else in that mix is like the back end of first round. But like that's the thing. There's probably only 6 or 7 tackles there to go first round. Really good tackle class. And then you got guys like the kid out of BYU, who I think at some point is the starter, but like there's some development there. Yep. Patrick Paul out of Houston, kind of in that same boat, I would say, probably go within the same range of picks. So there's some guys on day 2 that could be interesting if they fall to 52, but I'm like, there's no way those guys are taking Dan Moore's job right away.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, and I'll just speak to Kingsley Suamataia personally, just because I've followed his entire college career. I've known who this kid is since he played in high school. But if the Steelers were to go that way, that's a scenario where Dan Moore Jr. is definitely going to be your starter next season. I don't see Kingsley winning the job right away. I think he needs to develop more. And personally, after watching him at college, unless something changed in the NFL, I think the Steelers would hope that Broderick can make the change to left tackle full time, because I think that Kingsley is a better right tackle than a left tackle after watching him in college.
Well, there's probably, I think, majority of the guys that we're talking about, like, I don't know how many of them I think are going to make the switch to the left side or could make the switch to the left side. Like, I think it's going to be Broderick on the left.
Although, let me tell you why.
Fulog is for sure a right tackle. Guyton, I think is a right. Latham's the right tackle. Like,
let me tell you why I think guys like Amarius Mims or JC Latham make a lot of sense for why the Steelers would pick them. And it has nothing to do with necessarily their on-field skill set, but when you look at them physically, those two guys feel like Steelers to me more, because I feel like the Steelers like these tall, big-bodied guys, like the really thick tackles. They're both 6'7". They're both 340 plus. I think Mims is like 360 or something like that. And a couple of these other tackles, obviously they're big dudes. And we were talking about guys that are like 320, 330. But for some reason, I feel like the Steelers like these bigger-bodied guys. And so if I was looking at who I think the Steelers would pick, I'd be leaning towards guys like that who have that type of frame.
Yeah. Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to monitor, the visits and stuff, and see if they're even who they're interested in, and like, is it going to be all the top centers and all the top tackles? We haven't really talked about corner yet, but like, probably, because if you imagine if they go corner in round 1, what that means for round 2, because then you're choosing between like center and tackle if they even get
trade
there.
Up for Terry and Arnold. Let's go. We're talking about trading out. Keep doing it.
I love Terry and Arnold,
you have
but
to trade up really high for that.
It's interesting because I was having this discussion with Derek. Like, it obviously would never happen, but if the teams had to, like, after the draft was over, put out the information how they had the rankings, I would be so curious to see teams' boards afterwards, because I think this corner class is really interesting at the top. Because, like, just talking to other people, like Terry and Arnold, I have number 1. I know a lot of other people that have Quinyon Mitchell number 1. There's people that have Wiggins number 1. I'm sure Kool-Aid's probably got, a subset that have him at number 1. Like, really interesting stuff. And then there's like the Ennis Rakestraw Jr. who's been injured and stuff. But like, if there's a Joey Porter Jr. in this draft class, it's Ennis Rakestraw Jr. Like, profile wise, size wise, very Joey Porter Jr. like. And a lot of the same, honestly, issues in terms of like his footwork and stuff that needs cleaned up. So, in my opinion, really good corner class too. But that's why I think you can get starters even like in round, like at pick 84. There's 3 corners that are probably going to be there that I'm going to really like and say they're day 1 starters. Whether you want to go the nickel route and like a Mike Sainristil out of Michigan, or I just mentioned Ennis Rakestraw, his teammate Chris Abrams-Drain, who I think is going to be a really good player. Cam Hart out of Notre Dame.
Do you think there's a chance that they could double dip at corner in this draft class, because they could use a boundary corner and a nickel corner?
I'll say if they sign a center, if they're not going to draft a center, it's possible.
Yeah, because I think it's very clear that they have a need for both.
Yeah, they do. Like, it could. That's what I'm saying. Like, okay, so you could go, who in round 1, you go Terry and Arnold or Quinyon Mitchell. Round 2, you get a tackle, Patrick Paul or the kid out of BYU. I'm not even going to try to say his name. And then round 3, go Mike Sainristil. I mean, I don't see it happening, but like, it's possible. We haven't talked about receiver yet, just because I think they need one. But
if you want we haven't talked about receiver. They definitely need a receiver. They don't have a wide receiver 3. Their wide receiver 3 right now. Their third best pass catcher is Pat Freiermuth. If in my ideal, you want to know what I would personally like to see happen, you sign Stephon Gilmore in free agency, so you have another boundary corner to pair with Joey Porter Jr., and then you draft your nickel corner in this year's draft. Yeah. That's something I think that could work out. I mean, obviously, there's different ways you could pair that up, but me personally, I mentioned Stephon Gilmore like a month ago in free agents that we were interested in. I think it would be really cool to see them bring in Gilmore and then get their.
I mean, that's kind of the same thing that they just did with Patrick Peterson. Doing it for, hopefully, like, I would assume he's 33 years old. Like, he still played pretty good ball for Dallas last year, but he ain't signing more than a 1 or 2 year deal, and hopefully it's just 1. So, Yeah, you're kind of kicking the can down the road. You're just renting a player basically in Stephon Gilmore for a year. But that's fine because then you have like still Darius Rush and hopefully Corey Trice part of it this year that can develop behind them, and maybe they show something this year to be part of the plan moving forward. But yeah, like it eliminates having to take a guy on the boundary in the draft. So I definitely don't mind it. I've mentioned not obviously, that high of a ceiling guy, but like Dane Jackson, who's a free agent this year coming back to Pittsburgh and kind of being the same thing. Like Buffalo kept pushing him out, and because of injuries, he had to end up being a starter again this year. And played okay. But like if you go and get a guy like that's like a security blanket, and then maybe guys like Trice or Darius Rush just are that much better than him and beat him out in camp, then so be it. One of those guys is the starter. But if not, you have a safety blanket. You have a guy that's been there and done that as a pro in Dane Jackson. So I don't know. We'll see the route that they go at corner, but yeah, that's kind of all I wanted to say on that. I want to ask you kind of another I guess we've kind of already talked about it, but in your mind, is there a path to them being like super aggressive in free agency or trade? Like we've talked about the lack of money, we've talked about the lack of draft picks. Like, would there be a scenario that you think they're going to be like, yeah, we'll shell out, whatever it is, $45 million a year for Kirk Cousins, and we'll make the space for it? Or if Jalen Johnson doesn't get tagged or reach a long-term deal with Chicago, we just saw L'Jarius Sneed is getting the tag put on him, but if they're not able to reach a long-term deal, they're going to let him explore opportunities elsewhere because they're not going to make him play on the tag this year. I think there's a lot of different scenarios out there, and I just didn't know how you felt if the Steelers will be aggressive in that market.
I mean, I'd like to say yeah, and maybe that's a little hopium, but I do think that the Steelers' philosophy and how they've handled the draft free agency has been very different ever since Kevin Colbert retired and Omar Khan has stepped in as the GM for this team. I think that there are opportunities where they could do that. Like if they were able to trade for L'Jarius Sneed, I think that that's worth giving up some of the limited value that you have in those picks already. We just talked about that you don't have a ton of it, but I think that's worth giving up if they're able to get a talent like that. I mean, we look at what he was able to do this season, and especially in that postseason run, he was amazing. Obviously, that's a trade and a contract you're going to give up. I mean, we obviously, and here's another reason I'll say Kirk Cousins isn't going to happen. There's no way they're signing anybody to that big of money on the offensive side of the football. That just is not going to happen. It's going to be a defensive player. But I think that there's a pathway to it. Because I think that the Steelers' way is not what it was even 5 years ago. I think that they're going to be more aggressive. They've shown signs of being more aggressive with some of their recent history in the offseason. So obviously, I'm not going to like give a specific way like who they're going to be trading for or who they would sign that could be bid money. But I think just because of what we've seen in the drafts and free agents of the last couple of years, I think that there is definitely a chance that something could happen. It's not the normal status quo where we're just going to be having a quiet offseason still. I feel like the Steelers have a different philosophy now.
Yeah, I think a telltale for that was that the trade deadline last year. Granted, they didn't get it done, but they were trying to get Jalen Johnson from the Bears. Do we think that was as a rental? No. They would have extended him. Mm-hmm. So clearly there was interest there. They knew it would have been a big money free agent that they had to retain. I don't think it's going to be him now. I think that he's probably, with what he did after the trade deadline too, I don't see it. I think he's going to end up back in Chicago. But like, to me, L'Jarius Sneed is the guy to do that for. Like, I would give up a second round pick and pay him what you needed to retain him. To have him be the guy opposite of Joey Porter Jr. for a while. Like, you're talking about a guy that's still 27. I don't know when he turns 28, but he's still 27 right now. Plays inside out for Kansas City. Like, top 3 most important player probably within that defense. Chris Jones is obviously super important. Nick Bolton's super important. It's probably between Sneed and McDuffie.
He just turned 27.
Like, he just turned 27. So yeah, I mean, give him a 3 or 4 year deal. You know, I don't know what the cap hit per would be, but it's not going to be anywhere near, in my opinion, what Jalen Johnson's going to get anyway on a long-term deal. And just know that that's locked down for a while. And then that second round pick, unfortunately, yeah, that it costs that as well as the contract now because of the way that this is being done. But like, you could have made the argument that you had to use a second round pick on a corner anyway, and you weren't going to get a corner anywhere near his caliber. Even if it's another position that you're talking about missing out on, you weren't going to get a player of his caliber at any position anyway. Like, I mean, we're talking about an all-pro type player here that plays multiple spots, does everything that the Steelers defense is looking for. Like, from a scheme fit, it's perfect. Like, he does everything in terms of blitzing off the corner too. Like, I don't think people realize that, like, how physical this guy is. Like, probably one of the better tackling corners in the league. And you can have him do some different, like, Mike Hilton-ish stuff that we've kind of been missing since he left. So Snead is the guy to do it for, in my opinion. I don't know that I expect them to, but I would definitely be pounding the table for them to do so. And again, thinking back to how their approach, now they didn't get it done, but at last year's trade deadline, I don't think that the door is shut for them still being willing to be aggressive in that way.
Yeah, I agree with that. Also, if you had to make, and I'm just thinking about this because I was talking with our buddy Jake one night in Discord after playing some games. If we had to make a guess for who the Steelers would pick in the second round at receiver, because we know that's always on the table, who do you think it could be? You just mentioned that we hadn't mentioned receiver, so I figure we should just mention receiver real quick to round out this free agent / draft talk.
Ooh, who do we think they would pick? You said, not who would I pick?
Yeah, not who you would pick. Who you think the Steelers are going to pick? Because if the Steelers picked them in the second round, you already know everybody's going to pick that player in their dynasty draft because they're bound to be good, unless your name's Chase Claypool.
Yeah. I think Roman Wilson will probably be gone, but that's like, I would say Roman Wilson or Malachi Corley.
Okay.
And that's also probably the route that I would go. But I think Roman Wilson's probably going to be off the board before then. Malachi might be too, but I'll give a shout to Xavier Worthy as well. I can't see. You know, the thing is, like, the prerequisite for receivers has totally shifted now that Arthur Smith is the offensive coordinator. Like, what you're looking for in a receiver. Like, Deontay Johnson's already on the roster, but if he wasn't, like, you're not even looking for that type of receiver for Arthur Smith's offense. You're looking for a George Pickens type of receiver still, because it's big-bodied receivers that are high point contested catch, big playmakers down the field. It's not the Deontay Johnsons of the world. So, like, that's why I can definitely envision a world where they sign Matt Collins in free agency, who Arthur Smith had in Atlanta, to have him fill a role. And there's probably going to be times where he would be the only receiver on the field and we'd be going nuts because they're going to play like 3 tight ends. But yeah, those are my answers. Malachi Corley's not big at all, by the way, but like everybody's chasing like big in terms of like height. He's like a compact Deebo Samuel type build. Would probably be Arthur Smith's Cordero Patterson, to be honest.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say either of the Washington guys. Not O'Dunes. He's gonna be gone in the first round. But whether I feel like Jalen Polk would definitely be their second pick if he was still there, and then you could probably get Jalen McMillan. Wait, do they have a third round pick?
Yeah, 84.
Yeah, but I'm for some reason I have a feeling like if they pick a receiver, either of those Washington guys would be in play.
That was, man, what a fun offense to watch this year, that Washington offense. Yeah, Rome Odunze's going top 10, but the other two could definitely be in play further down the board. That's interesting. I wouldn't mind it. Okay, we got a couple questions here regarding the Steelers that we can address. It was actually to me directly instead of around the 412.
Wow.
Well, like I quoted it and stuff, but Trevor said, what do you think the results would have to be for Russell Wilson, Kirk Cousins, and Justin Fields acquisitions to be worth it? This is interesting because, like, you know, is the bar as low as, like, we made the playoffs without them, right? So, like, how could just getting to the playoffs make it worth it? but also if you're going to say Super Bowl, I mean, no matter who you bring in my opinion, that's not going to be the case. So
can I would say for each of them, the answer is different.
Okay.
I think that for Russell Wilson, that one probably has the least amount of consequence because of what you were talking about earlier with
you're
the cap.
You're not giving up anything. Yeah.
You're not really giving up anything. So to make it worth it to me, if the Steelers stayed the same, that would still be worth it. Just because you're not really losing anything with it. The one with the biggest consequence, I guess depending on how you look at it, the one with the biggest consequence to me would be Justin Fields, because to me, like, you do not know what Justin Fields' type of quarterback is. You know what Kirk Cousins is. So I know you're giving up a lot of cap space to get Kirk Cousins, but you know the type of player he is. Like, you even said yourself that, like, you assumed the type of player Kirk Cousins was, and then you just realized that, he's actually a good quarterback. And I feel like that's a consensus opinion now around the league, is he's just not a stat pattern. He's an actually good quarterback that can run an offense. He might cost a lot of money, but I think that the biggest consequence would be Justin Fields, because to me, there's multiple variables that you would have to gauge success in the upcoming season for with Justin Fields. Like, number one, did you make the playoffs? Like, if you're not getting at minimum what you were able to get with a combination of Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky, and Mason Rudolph, that's automatically an L. And is he improving as a quarterback in your offense? Is he going to show progress from what he was in Chicago? Because if you're trading for this player, that means that you think that he's going to develop more in your offense. If he doesn't do that, I think that makes the trade even worse. Because, like I've said, I've harped on it I said it in this show, I said it a couple weeks ago. Like, you're not trading for the first round pick Justin Fields. You're trading for what Justin Fields is right now. So if they give up too much, then that trade could look really bad depending on how he would progress in the offense. And so, to me, like, to make that trade worth it, not only do I think that at minimum Justin Fields would have to make it to the playoffs, not necessarily win a game, but he'd have to at least do the bare minimum of what the other quarterbacks did last season. He needs to progress individually himself within that offense and progress as an NFL quarterback, because I don't think it would be worth it at that point. And with Kirk Cousins, for me to be worth it, if you sign him to that deal, win a playoff game. I'm not going to ask for much. Obviously, I know that your people are probably going to say, if you sign Kirk Cousins, it's Super Bowl or bust. Listen, we haven't won a playoff game since like 2017. I'm not going to be that picky.
We're obviously in the same conference as Patrick Mahomes.
We're in the same conference as Patrick Mahomes. We're in the same conference as I was going to say not in conference. We're in the same division as the two-time reigning MVP Lamar Jackson. We're in the same conference of the healthy Joe Burrow. I mean, there's a lot of going against
Josh Allen
right now.
Justin Herbert, Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, there's a lot
CJ
going against
Stroud
it right now. So I think that the bar shouldn't be that high, but I would say, like, I would gauge the success as, like, can you get over the hump of at least winning a game in the postseason? Because obviously, like, the bar is making it there. That's set by the quarterbacks we already have. You just got to at least win a game, I think, and I think that would be worth it in my eyes, to me. And obviously, you're gonna expect more, but that's where I would set the bar with Kirk Cousins, and that's why I think the consequence is less. Because obviously, it's a lot of money, and it could strap you in other areas. But you're not only giving up picks for Justin Fields, but you're also potentially setting the team back even, like, further, because you're resetting who you're building this franchise around, or who you want to build this franchise around, and it might not pan out again.
I definitely agree with, like, Russ is consequential for sure. My thing with Cousins, and you just mentioned it in that last part, was I think if you bring him in, he needs to be so good that it masks the other deficiencies that are caused by what he's making, because you're not going to have money to spread it out along the way. With Fields, assuming, like, I don't know if they would have a contract extension done, or they would just want to see him play out the year and then his fifth year option or whatever to see. But even on his fifth year option at like $23 million, it's probably not exactly half. It's probably just a shade over half of what you'd be paying Cousins. Like, that's a that's L'Jarius Sneed's salary, probably. Like Fields plus L'Jarius Sneed is what Cousins would be making, I think. So, like, I don't know. But like, I can't measure it on team success again, just because like I don't see it. Like, I don't think that they are just Kirk Cousins away from winning a Super Bowl. I don't know that anybody actually legitimately thinks that. They can maybe say that, but you take a look around the division, you take a look around the conference, man, you almost feel like, obviously the best thing that can ever happen is having a quarterback on a rookie contract. But this is why I'm pushing for L'Jarius Sneed. Put the chips in on the other side of the football, because clearly it's not there with the offense. It's got to be for the defense. Like, whatever the missing pieces are on defense, find them and let that continue to be the strength. Make the strength even stronger and see what you can do. I don't know. I mean, it's tough to have these conversations again when you're watching the Chiefs win 3 Super Bowls in 5 years and figuring out how are we going to compete with this. But it's in my opinion clearly not on the roster right now, and I don't know that any of the names we talked about necessarily are getting them quite there.
Yeah, and I will add this. So we're both saying that the expectation shouldn't be Super Bowl or bust if you brought in a guy like Kirk Cousins, but I think inevitably it would be, because you're putting all the chips into that table, and you are Super Bowl and bust at that point with that guy.
Yeah, I mean, at least AFC Championship.
Because like, I wouldn't view. I mean, I guess no, I wouldn't view, if they brought in Russ, I wouldn't view it as Super Bowl or bust, and a lot of that has to do with the little consequence that will go against the Steelers if something bad happened. And I definitely wouldn't think that with Fields. Fields, to me, is not even who they bring in to be more competitive. Fields, to me, is like an experiment to see if we can be the team to figure out this guy at the NFL level. But
you're
Cousins,
for the
if you're bringing in that guy, you are trying to win the Super Bowl, hands down. The other two, you're trying to do better than you were. But if you're paying Cousins that much, there's no other way around it.
I do think Fields is probably the biggest swing that they could take. I would say even over Cousins, because we know what Cousins is. Fields, there's still a bit of a question mark because he's played in multiple offenses, which have all been considered by most very bad offenses in Chicago. I think last year they probably did the best job of trying to give him a supporting cast. And this isn't to absolve him of any blame or anything like that, because like I said, I still wouldn't give up a 2. I would do a 3. I think that I don't know what you said about a 3, but I would do a 3. I wouldn't give up a 1 or a 2, obviously. And the Deontay Johnson thing is ridiculous. But it's a lot because of the fit in Arthur Smith's offense. Like Derek and I were having this conversation. There's less than a 50% chance that he would be an improvement. But like, for a 3rd round pick, I'm taking that swing because I think at the very least it's more fun to watch. Like, at the very least, I think I'm gonna have more fun watching the Steelers if it's Justin Fields over Kenny Pickett.
I agree with that. I'd do it if it was a 3, but I still can't get it out of my head that, like, I just feel like the Bears are not going to settle for that.
Well, what's interesting is with them today, like coming out, Ryan Poles said that he wanted to do right by Justin if they were going to trade him, and he would do it before free agency. To me, that's handcuffing yourself. Like, Nick and I were talking about this on the afternoon drive. Like, first off, already a question about how many teams are actually suitors anyway. Like, possibly Atlanta, possibly Vegas. Would any of those teams at the top rather have him than draft Jaden Daniels or Drake May? I wouldn't want my team to do that. I would take the swing on one of those guys in the draft and reset the rookie contract. I don't know. I think the Steelers don't have much company there or competition there for Justin Fields services. So part of me thinks, because of the timeline, I'm not going to use the word rush, but like in an urgency to get this done before free agency starts, I think they get a 3 and maybe a conditional pick next year. The 3 would be this year. I think a conditional pick next year.
I can get on board with that. But I don't know. I agree that it would be more fun to watch, though. We literally were talking like watching the Steelers offense last year felt like a job that you hate going to, but you have to.
Yeah. Kind of along the same lines here. Shappy said, thoughts on Kenny Pickett. What's interesting is we're talking about Fields. I feel like a lot of fans in Chicago probably feel the same way Steelers fans do about Pickett. So it's like almost interesting that there's so many people within the Steelers community that are so obsessed with the idea of Justin Fields. And again, I think it's because he's more fun. You're more intrigued by the upside there than Kenny Pickett, and Kenny Pickett's already, like, in our eyes, the more known commodity. Man, like I want Kenny to be good so bad. There just hasn't been enough there, like in terms of the flashes to buy in. To me, there's nothing when I watch him that I say, okay, there's that at least that you can build an NFL offense around. I haven't seen anything jump off the page to me and be like, okay, well, you can build around this. He can do this really well. Like, okay, play action stuff, fine. Throws an okay deep ball, back shoulder fade. There's things that he does that are okay, but nothing that is like, this is how you build around this guy. So to me, I would say at the end of the day, and this is definitely putting a projection on him that has not already been stated. He can go out there and prove me wrong. I think at the end of the day, he's going to have a decently long NFL career, but Pittsburgh will be the only place that he is an actual starting quarterback. I think whenever his stop here ends, we're talking about a high-end backup, maybe like a 1B situation where he'll go somewhere else and compete for a job, but you're not talking about a guy that's ever deemed a potential franchise quarterback like when he first got drafted in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and obviously hindsight is 2020, but looking at some of the guys that were drafted immediately after Pickett in that draft, the next
like not
Trent McDuffie.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, even Buffalo, a couple picks later, Kyer Elam.
Yeah.
Tyler Linderbaum. Devin Lloyd. There's George Karlaftis.
Yeah, you should look at that entire Chiefs rookie class. Those guys, they only know winning the Super Bowl, but those two were part of it. Sky Moore's whatever. Pacheco was in the 7th round. There was some other really good players in there.
So Trent McDuffie and George Karlaftis were in round 1. Sky Moore and Brian Cook were in round 2.
Yeah, Brian Cook.
Leo Chenal was round 3.
Yeah,
that one hurt.
Yep,
that one hurt.
Yep.
Let's see.
Watson, corner, right?
Jalen Watson was round 7. Yeah. Isaiah Pacheco was round 7.
I don't know what the last pick that they had.
Najee Johnson.
Yeah, I'm not sure about him, but
everybody else has been like Darian Kinnard.
Kennard.
Kennard. Does he play? I don't know.
I don't know about.
I don't think so. Joshua Williams was also their 4th round pick, another corner.
Yeah, and he's a really good special teamer at the very least. So they have so many guys from that draft class that contributed, and the only thing they know is winning Super Bowls. They've done it twice in 2 years since coming out. That's
crazy. The only thing we know is pain.
Yeah. So and then Morgan was the last one here, and they said, what are the pros cons of trading for Justin Fields? To me, the pro is it's somebody that and I will say no as opposed to think on this, even though it is more of a think, but we'll run this offense better. Like, I think it's tailor-made for Justin Fields, this offense. It'd be more
and it's
fun
more
to
entertaining.
Watch. It'd be more fun to watch. I think the floor of it is higher just because of what he can do as a rusher. Like, even if he doesn't develop as a passer, you know that he's got that to fall back on. The con, you're not going to have whatever draft pick that you are trading Chicago for him, or picks that you were trading to Chicago for him. You are impacting your cap for next year. Like, they weren't counting on $23 million at quarterback next year. They will be if they acquire Justin Fields.
And obviously they have a decision to make regardless because of the way Kenny Pickett's played, but if Justin Fields doesn't work out, it's not really helping the quarterback position at all, and you gave up picks for it.
Yeah, and I guess you could say you're pushing the timeline further than just, if you know that it's not Kenny after this year, wipe your hands clean and be done with it and move on. With Fields, you're extending that by a year. because of his 5th-year option, I would think. I can't imagine that even if they brought in Fields, he played poorly this year, and they had already picked up the 5th-year option, that he wouldn't be the starter in 25, and they would go
especially in year one of a new offense too.
Yeah, so I think that it'd probably be kicking the can down the road, regardless of performance by a year. Which, there's going to be guys that elevate, but like if you look at next year's draft class at quarterback right now, I don't know that I'd be too upset about missing out on it.
Next year's draft class as quarterback is
Shador, Quinn Ewers. Yeah, there's probably gonna be guys, like I said, that like no one was talking about Jaden Daniels this time last year being top 3.
Yeah.
So who knows? There'll be guys that elevate, but yeah, as of right now, I'm not seeing it. Anything else Steelers related?
No. I got nothing. But it's Steelers is fun because we get to have these types of conversations all year round, whether we're actually playing football, whether practices are happening, or whether we're preparing for this upcoming season. There's always interesting conversations to have about the Steelers.
Absolutely, because people always want to talk about it. That's why the only questions that we ever get really are going to be about the Pittsburgh Steelers. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell here, hit us in the comments with anything that you would like us to discuss or anything that we talked about on this episode. Obviously, Everything Custom Designs, link in the description for that. I didn't even think about it. St. Patrick's Day. I saw her advertising for St. Patrick's Day
there you go.
On her Facebook. So there you go. Get some customized clothing, but she does more than just holiday stuff. Customized t-shirts, hoodies, around the 412 logo stuff she's done in the past, and she has that design saved. So if you want to get something around the 412, you can go hit her up and do that. I think that's it. Oh, leave us a 5-star review if you're listening somewhere else, not just on YouTube. Obviously, we are on podcast platforms, Google, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from. For Tyler, for Smitty, this has been the Around the 412 Steelers show. We'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.